Obviously, video games are filled with missions that you have to get done, but some of them you're just like, come on. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, the 10 worst video game objectives which annoy us. Quick disclaimer, we don't think all of these types of objectives are necessarily bad. Like, there can be good examples of these things, but for the most part, they annoy us. And we're also not specifically criticizing the whole game. Starting off at number 10, timed objectives. You know what I'm talking about when you're on a timer and you go too slow and it's game over. Like, there's a ton of variety in these kinds of objectives. Sometimes they're short, only a few minutes. Sometimes they're basically the entire game, with Dead Rising and its 72-hour time limit. Actually, Dead Rising is a perfect example because basically every mission is a timed mission. You've only got so much time. You have to complete every single objective before the timer runs out, and you instantly fail if you don't. If it's a main quest, you're going to have to restart the game over and over and over, thanks to that time. Then there's also Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, which it's literally a 3-day timer, and you got to keep resetting that timer, otherwise a big angry rock comes and hits the town. Grand Theft Auto games love these kind of objectives as well. Some of the absolute worst missions in these games involve timed objectives, like supply lines from San Andreas, where you pilot that little drone and you have to destroy trucks around the city with a very limited amount of fuel. Yeah. Or Espresso to Go from Grand Theft Auto 3, where you have to find and destroy 9 espresso stands dotted around the city in less than 8 minutes. Yeah, the Grand Theft Auto 3 map isn't huge, but for that mission, it's a big map. One of the worst feelings ever is when you fail after just being seconds away from completing the mission. Definitely happens with all these missions at some point. And then you're left with the feeling of going, oh, I'm gonna have to do this again, aren't I? At number 9, it's escort missions. Like, here's another of the most obvious ones, I think. Sometimes they can be fun, sometimes they can be interesting, but it's sometimes. It's not all the time, or most of the time, or hardly any of the time, honestly. They're just really frustrating most of the time, to be completely clear. There's a few things that make for a really bad escort mission, by the way, like how much health the guy that you're escorting has and how good their AI is, which is usually, in a lot of games, not super great. I don't know why they make these people the dumbest people in the game, but yeah. And when you're stuck with a dummy that constantly walks into your bullets, like when you have to escort the president in Perfect Dark, it just sucks. Like, same when you're escorting somebody with very little health, like the little sisters at the end of BioShock. They only take a few hits from the swarms of splicers that attack you, and then they just die. You have to get a new one to start over. It sucks. Probably the worst ones, though, that I can remember is in Metal Gear Solid 2 when you have to escort Emma Emmerich through a section of the game. It's not just an escort mission, it's partially an underwater one. And of course, there is Resident Evil 4. A big part of the game is just escorting Ashley, which some pretty frustrating parts in that, but at least you're able to order her to stay behind for a while. Probably the worst escort mission ever is one of the worst games ever, though. The Adventures of Superman has an escort mission in it on Nintendo 64, where you escort Lois Lane in this one level, and she is so slow. Like, if you look away from her for a second, the game will spawn enemies to attack her, too. And when you get to the boss, she just randomly, runs directly at him, because she's dumb. Thanks for that, Lois. At number 8, it's fetch quests. Play any RPG and you will see these. These are objectives where somebody wants something, so you go out, collect the thing, and come back. Sounds like not a big deal. But once you do more than one of them, you start to realize how lazy they are for mission design. And wow, do we see it in every single game, it seems like. Even good games where there's lots of very good missions. Like recently with Xenoblade Chronicles, the remaster of that, pretty much every side mission is some kind of fetch quest. Another huge offender for these kinds of quests is Skyrim, which, by the way, again, tons of amazing missions in it. Still feels like half the quests you get are to collect something and take it back to the quest giver. Now, a lot of the time, like I said, they aren't really that bad, especially when the game gives you a marker on the map and tells you exactly where to get something. It's brainless, but it's at least not the most frustrating thing in the world. The worst is when they try to use these things to block your progress, like, oh, I don't know why you're playing Sonic 2006, but if you want to play a somewhat decent part of the game, like the Sonic stages, you're going to have to deal with a bunch of boring tasks from the NPCs dotted around the hub area. And when I say boring, I mean the worst. Most of the time, these quests just make everyone around you seem lazy, like really lazy. And I'm not talking about the developers, I'm talking about the people occupying this world. Like, you can't walk to the other side of this friggin' town and buy a honeycomb yourself or whatever. Are you in that good of a financial position where things that would take you 10 minutes are too much for you to do? Come on, man. Number 7, the do something boring objective. Like, the types of objectives where the game forces you to do something boring. Self-explanatory, right? Like, we're talking about games where you have to pretend to be a janitor for a little while during a heist, or the infamous box stacking sequence from the original Mafia. And some people love it, but you know the forklift parts in the Shenmue games? Yeah, those. Also, there's No More Heroes, which is normally a hack and slash game, but between all the assassin fighting, you gotta earn money by doing some amazingly tedious side jobs like mowing lawns, or, and this sounds cool, much cooler than it actually is, in fact, picking up scorpions. These things are not fun, despite how cool scorpions can be. And you have to do them multiple times if you want to make enough money to qualify for the actual missions in the game. Like, I want to play the game, guys. Are you really going to just artificially, like, expand the length of the game this way? Why? Why are you doing that? And yeah, I get it. Like, sometimes it's a realism thing. Sometimes doing menial stuff in a game makes sense from a realism perspective, but stop going so overboard. These things are sometimes really tedious. At number 6, protection missions. Basically, escort missions where the person you're escorting doesn't move. So it's worse. Like, usually with these, you end up having to protect multiple things at the same time, too. It's not necessarily a person. You just have to run around some area, swatting down enemies as they approach whatever. Like, it's basically become its own genre, tower defense games, which are, by the way, much better than protection missions that get integrated into other games because there are a lot more possibilities. Like, Gears of War has a mode built around it. But like, a recent game with protection missions that I'm talking about as bad is Marvel's Avengers, where sometimes you have to defend like 3 dudes in an area that are getting swarmed by enemies. We're usually pretty far apart from one another, often on different levels, and enemies can literally just teleport in, so it's hard to tell what direction they're coming from. Plus, these dudes are super weak. Another kind of recent example was Shadow of War's Shadow Wars thing. Basically, not only are you stuck doing these things, but you're stuck grinding up till the point that you do them. Otherwise, everybody's gonna get steamrolled. It's gonna happen. Basically, the end game of Shadow of War actually is one big protection mission, and it feels never ending because it's super long and it's super frustrating. At number 5 is scavenger hunt and hide and seek missions, which are like fetch quests, but worse. It's usually a list of items and they're usually hidden. Like, there's a Majora's Mask part where you have to find 5 of these kids. They're like hiding all around Clocktown, being the worst children of all time, and it's time consuming and it's tedious, and it's also in the Final Fantasy VII remake. Why do people do this? Hey, remember the Knuckles missions from the Sonic Adventure games where you have to fly around and look for gems in areas that are way too big and sparse and empty because it's an earlier 3D game? You remember Sonic Adventure 2 where you had to find them in order? Yeah. Whenever you do these kinds of objectives, it always seems to take twice as long to find the last thing because you end up looking around for the same place repeatedly, and they're never much fun, but they still pop up everywhere. There was a recent game we played called Phanatopia Awakening, and it had one of these missions in it. Like, why can't you guys stop putting them in games, developers? Is there a mandate? At number 4 is crafting objectives, and for this one, we are talking about games that have crafting systems, obviously, but are not necessarily all about crafting. Talking like Fallout 4 or Witcher 3, where they have the extensive systems, but you can basically ignore them. And a lot of people do, and then the game asks you to craft something. Now, most people are not obsessive hoarders and do not get every single possible item in the game, so it usually means consulting a guide of some kind. Also, Fallout 4 has like one of the worst crafting objectives where you have to build a teleporter. There's a secret location in the Institute that you need to do that to get to. And if you've never messed with the crafting system, let alone the settlement system, which adds more complication on top of that, you're gonna be pretty lost. Especially when it comes to hooking up the power cables, because you can know how that stuff works. I know how that stuff works, and I have trouble with that element of it. Still, like, these missions don't pop up too much, but they are really frustrating. At number 3 is the master something you'll only do a single time in the game objective, which I don't know that we really need to explain why they're so frustrating. You do a thing once in the game, and you have to master it, and that's the mission. Like, the most obvious example I can think of is that damn race in Mafia and its remake. We've talked about it on the channel before. It's like one of the most frustrating possible things. And Mafia is not a racing game. It is the only race in the entire thing. But for some reason, the developers decided to make it play like a full-blown racing simulator with really aggressive drivers, very technical control, and damage modeling. That basically means if you crash once, you'll never recover. Another really bad one can be found in Donkey Kong 64, where you have to beat the original Donkey Kong and get a high score to be able to fight the last boss. Yeah, you gotta do really well in an old arcade game. Which, by the way, old arcade games are hard to finish this cartoon platformer for kids. And number 2 is forced stealth sections. We're particularly talking about the ones where stealth isn't like a main thing in the game or even the thing or a thing at all. They're always a drag because any game that is not a stealth game, forcing you into stealth section, is usually not good at the stealth section. Like, even in games that are very, very good, like Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, The Forsaken Fortress, don't like, do not like. Or like the parts where you play as Mary Jane or Miles Morales from Spider-Man on PS4. Yeah. What makes them so annoying is that it's basically trial and error. They're not stealth games, so you don't have a lot of options for how to sneak. Basically, the game just expects you to do it a certain way because, yeah, that's what you have to do. They're not like stealth mechanics. It's just a section where they're like, what if we made it so they had to sneak? And then they have a very specific idea as to what sneak means. Like, the thing that probably bugs me the most about some of these sequences is that they don't make any sense. Like, if you've ever played Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast, oldie but a goodie, real classic of a game, still has one of these sections in it. You have to sneak through an enemy base. Like, there is nothing different about the game except for you can't just slaughter all the enemies with your lightsaber. It's just arbitrarily that you cannot get caught. And of course, you get spotted at the end of the section anyway for story reasons, so the whole thing was completely pointless. Like, it's just not fun. And neither are most of these sections.
Bust!
And finally, at number 1, I'm going to say there's a distinct possibility someone may disagree with this one, but forced grinding objectives. Yes, I understand quite a few people out there like games for grinding. However, these types of objectives, just lazy. They just stop a game dead in its tracks and tell you to get more stuff. Like, you see this a ton of the time in like MMOs and games as a service type games because it's easy. You slap a little progress bar on your HUD, put some collectibles or resources right beside it, and that's it. Probably the most recent version of this mission, and like, it's a game that's universally pretty much hated all around, so I don't think you're gonna disagree. It's Anthem. If you remember the challenges of the Legionnaires quest, the game just stops you in the middle of the story and says, hey, find 4 tombs. Doesn't sound so hard, does it? Yeah, gives you excuse to see the world a little bit, absorb the sights a bit, integrate yourself into the universe of the game. Yeah, but when you find a tomb, the door's locked. Door's locked. Only way to open it, you do a bunch of other objectives, like perform 50 melee kills, or use your ultimate ability 20 times. Just time-wasting crap. Maybe the worst one was the revive objective, where you had to revive your teammates so many times, because it's completely dependent on your team doing poorly, which is dumb. Like, people would start teams just so people could get killed to get past this stupid objective. That's how bad this is. And it's better now, but it's also still Anthem, so whatever, I guess. These kinds of objectives are basically in, like, multiplayer games of every kind. There's nowhere you can get a respite from them. They just exist. And when you're doing them in the background, when you're actually doing the fun part of the game, that's pretty harmless. But when you're forced to do them, they just really suck. What are some of the worst video game objectives you can remember? Did we name them here, or are you thinking of some other ones? We're interested in what you have to say. Leave us a comment, let us know. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.